Greetings, friends. I am Sandra Beardall, living in Saskatoon, Canada, and moderator of the Nicaea 2025 Steering Group of the Faith and Order Commission. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you from every continent to this one-hour webinar, Easter 2025, Celebrating Together to Strengthen Unity. The Feast of the Resurrection lies at the heart of Christian faith, but finding a common date for that celebration is complex. It must consider lunar and solar cycles, differing calendars, and long-held traditions. You can find helpful historical information on the event page for this webinar. A common date for Easter is important to the World Council of Churches. A joint consultation of the WCC and the Middle East Council of Churches in 1997 issued a statement that offered possible directions, but we are still on the road. WCC General Secretary Jerry Pillay notes that a shared date must truly include all the churches. This Nicaea year, when all Christians will in fact celebrate Easter on a common day, there is fresh impetus to explore this hope. Today, panelists from 4 traditions will offer their perspectives on the search for a way to celebrating on a common date every year. Our panelists, in the order they will speak, are His Eminence Metropolitan Professor Dr. Job Getcha, Metropolitan of Pisidia, Father Professor Dr. Arsenius Mikhail of the St. Athanasius and St. Cyril Coptic Orthodox School in Newport Beach, California, USA, Dr. Johannes Oeldemann of the Johann Adam Möller Institute for Ecumenical in Paderborn, Germany, and Reverend Dr. Tomi Karttunen, Executive Secretary for the Ecumenical Relations and Theology, Lutheran Church of Finland. Each panelist will speak for 10 minutes, and then we will engage in a Q&A for 15 minutes. You may enter questions for one or more speakers using the Q&A tab on the webinar screen, and we will handle as many as we can. If you have a comment, you may also use the chat box. Following this webinar, we are planning to publish the papers of the webinar, but we will also include some of the questions and discussion. So please enter your questions and your discussion, even if we won't get time for it in this very short webinar. So that's the plan. But first, I'd like to invite Faith and Order Youth Commissioner Mawuli Assimadi to offer us a brief statement on the importance of our task. Over to you, Mawuli.
Thank you very much. I am going to speak in the name of the youth of the Faith and Order Commission, and also as a part of the Youth Commission of the WCC. Reflecting on the common celebration of Easter this year, we find it very good that Easter will be celebrated together this year. We think in times like this, within crisis and polarizations, unity is very important. So as far as we celebrate it together, it's a sign that we have such time of common celebration, that we seek unity. We are aware that unity works also in diversity. So our will is that this celebration continues together, even though traditions might be different. Unity in diversity, it is a key word of us as young members of the Faith and Order Commission, and we want to encourage this initiative toward unity in our diversities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mawuli. And now we will turn to Metropolitan Job for our first speaker.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on the common date of Easter in the frame of this year's celebration of the 1,700 years of the Council of Nicaea. I have a short PowerPoint presentation to help you follow me more closely. So, Saint Athanasius of Alexandria, one of the witnesses of the Council of Nicaea, witnesses that the Council of Nicaea has been held to resolve the Arian conflict and also to resolve the question of the common date of Easter. And he's mentioning that the problem was at that time that some Christians of Syria, Cilicia, and Mesopotamia were celebrating Easter together with the Jews. In his encyclical letter after the Council of Nicaea, the Emperor Constantine, who had convened the Council of Nicaea, says, I quote, "It is vexing to hear the Jews boast that without them the Christian would not be able to observe Easter." So it seems that the Council of Nicaea not only found a way to have a common celebration of all Christians together, but also found a way in order that the Christians may calculate, determine the date of Easter in an autonomous way, not being dependent of the Jewish calculation. Another text taken from the Apostolic Constitutions, which were compiled in Antioch at the end of the 4th century, therefore it's a compilation dating of after the Council of Nicaea, says that Pascha, Easter, should be determined in according to the spring equinox with care and precision. Do not rely on the calculation of Jews, which was already erroneous at that time, and therefore, and that that the celebration of Easter should be always on a Sunday. So, according to what we can see from these texts is that the Council of Nicaea has determined to celebrate Easter on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox. So why there is such an importance on the moon? Because the Jewish Passover was celebrating during the full moon of spring. But it is interesting that the reference was neither in a precise calendar, neither to the date of a feast of a specific religion, but the reference was to astronomic phenomena, the spring equinox, the full moon, and the Sunday. The Orthodox Church follows this calculation, but in order to determine the date of Pascha, until today, the Orthodox Church is using the Julian calendar. According to the Julian calendar, already at the times of the Council of Nicaea, the spring equinox was falling on March 22nd. So it means that, which corresponds to April the 4th in the Gregorian calendar. So it means that the Orthodox, until today, will never celebrate Easter before April the 4th. Also, the full moon to determine the date of Easter in the Orthodox Church is not actually the full moon you see on the sky, but it's the date which is prescribed according to all the tables called Paschalian. So here you have an example. I will not explain it in details, but here you have all the possible and imaginable dates when Easter could fall during a year. You have to, first of all, you have to use the year from, according to a Byzantine calculation, which is the year from, so said the year from the beginning of the creation. So in other words, you have to, according to that Byzantine calculation, you have to calculate to add 5,508 years to our number of years. So this year is the year 7,533. And then you have to divide this number by 28, which is corresponding to the cycle of the moon and the cycle of the sun. And with the remaining numbers, then you have to check on the line number 9, go to the column when you find the number 1, and then you have the answer according to that table that Easter is on the 7th of April 7533, which correspond to the 20th of April 2025 according to our modern day calendar. Christians in the West usually nowadays use a much more updated calculation. We know today that the spring equinox is not anymore on 22nd of March. It falls on the 20th of March. Then this year full moon falls on Sunday, April 13. And then if you take the first Sunday following that full moon, you fall on April 20th, which is the same result as the very complicated table that I explained just before. So this explains that this year, by accident, all the Christians will celebrate Easter on the same date. But next year, it will not be the case, because if you do all these complicated calculation and look in these old tables, you will find as a result that Easter will fall on the 30th of March according to the Julian calendar, which will be April the 12th. As with the astronomic dates, you have the result of April the 5th. So next year, in 2026, Orthodox will celebrate Easter 1 week later. Sometimes the difference may be even of 1 month. Not because of different ways of calculation, but because of the data which is used to calculate the date. Of course, the issue of the calendar reform, the Orthodox are since a long time conscious that there is something wrong with their calendars and with their tables, which do not reflect the astronomic reality. So all these issues have been discussed since already 1902, since the last century. In 1902, Ecumenical Patriarch Joachim II was already speaking about a common date of Easter, and was also speaking about using more accurate astronomic data in an encyclical he sent to all the primates of the Orthodox churches. Then in 1920, we have the famous encyclical of the Ecumenical Patriarchate addressed to all the churches of Christ everywhere, which speaks of a common unified calendar to celebrate the great Christian feasts at the same time by all the churches. In 1923, there was a meeting in Constantinople for the revision of the calendar, and a very famous Serbian scientist, Milutin Milankovic, has proposed a more accurate calendar than the Gregorian calendar. And a reform was proposed at that time concerning the fixed dates of the church year, so Christmas, Transfiguration, Annunciation, and so on. But the reform did not touch the reform of the Paschal compute. So this calendar proposed by Milankovic in 1923 was slowly adopted by several Orthodox churches. First by the Church of Estonia and Finland, the year after by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Church of Cyprus, the Church of Greece, the Church of Poland, the Church of Romania. In 1928 by the Patriarchates of Alexandria and Antioch, in 1937 by the Church of Albania, and in 1968 by the Orthodox Church of Bulgaria. So this explains why all these churches will celebrate, for example, Christmas on the 25th of December, as the other churches that have not adopted the calendar reform will continue to celebrate Christmas with the Julian calendar, which falls in the Gregorian calendar on January the 7th. Nevertheless, all these churches will still keep the old way of calculating Easter according to the Julian calendar and the old Paschalia tables. In the way of the preparation of the Holy and Great Council, the question of the revision of the calendar and the revision of the calendar, the Paschalion, was pointed out on many occasions. So we have it appear on the list of the topics to be discussed during the Holy and Great Council during the meeting of 1930 on Mount Athos. Then it appears once again at the first Pan-Orthodox Conference of Rhodes of 1961 in the section about worship, the revision of the calendar and of the Paschalion. Then in 1976, the first pre-conciliar conference in Chambézy identified the question of the calendar reform and the common celebration of Easter as one of the 10 topics to be discussed by the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church. In light of that, the year after, in 1977, a meeting of Orthodox astronomers met in Chambézy in Geneva and discussed, recommended to keep the definition of the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea 325, discuss the inaccuracy of the Julian calendar for the determination of this date, also discuss the relation between the Easter, Christian Easter with the Jewish Passover. Is this a necessity to take into the calculation the date which is used by the Jews or not? They were also discussed of the need of a common celebration of Pascha, especially in the Orthodox diaspora, where different Christians live side by side, and also discussed the relevance of a common celebration of Easter for the Christian unity. And the recommendation, the final decision was that a new Paschalion, a revised Paschalion, should be prepared using the most accurate astronomical data based on the meridian of Jerusalem. And here, as you can see, these are new tables with updated dates which correspond to the contemporary astronomic data, that those tables that were ought to be approved by the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church. So everything for calendar reform has been prepared by Orthodox astronomers. 20 years later, there was the famous consultation of our commission, Faith and Order, in Aleppo, which followed more or less the same resolutions as the meeting of Orthodox astronomers in Chambézy in 1977. That is to say, to follow the definition, the rule of the First Ecumenical Council, to use the most accurate astronomical data, and to use as a reference for that astronomic data the meridian of Jerusalem, taking into account that the place of the death and the resurrection of Christ was Jerusalem. And everything ought to be done at the Holy and Great Council. And in 2016, the synaxis of primates of the Orthodox Church met in Chambézy. They decided unanimously that the Holy and Great Council should be convened on the island of Crete in June 2016, but they resolved that the question of the calendar and the common celebration of Easter to be omitted from the agenda of this council, which met in June 2016. And thus, unfortunately, the question of the calendar was postponed at Calendas Grecas And this is where we stand today. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Metropolitan Job, for that. And we much appreciate your historical recollections for us. And so now we'll turn to Father Arsenius.
Thank you, Reverend Professor Beardsall. And I don't have a presentation like His Eminence provided us, very informative, but I do have a prepared written statement about this topic. I would like to express my sincere thanks for the Faith and Order Commission of the World Council of Churches for extending this kind invitation to participate in this webinar on the topic of a common date for the Easter celebration. Of course, I claim no special expertise in the astronomical and calendrical aspects of this common debate, but I approach the topic of our webinar today from the perspective of a historian of Coptic culture and ritual, as well as that of a practicing member and priest of the Coptic Orthodox Church, the largest of the so-called Oriental or non-Chalcedonian church communities, and one that shares its Easter calculation with the vast majority of Orthodox Christians. While this means that I do not speak in an official capacity on behalf of the Coptic Orthodox Church, I do think that my reflections on this issue are highly relevant, especially since my ecclesiastical experience is most informed by my life and service within the Coptic community of the United States, home to up to 2 million Coptic Christians who remain faithful to an Easter calculation at variance with the broader society in which they live. Today's webinar is indeed very timely for several reasons. This is due to the strong connection between the Easter debate and the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea, whose 1700th anniversary is celebrated this year in 2025, a year in which the date of Easter also coincides between all churches of East and West. So in the midst of this opportunity and optimism to revisit such an important topic of Christian unity, I offer the following humble reflections from my experience as a historian and member of the Coptic Orthodox Church. It would be no exaggeration to say that the debate over the date of the annual Easter celebration is nearly as old as Christianity itself. Already before the 4th century, works of ecclesiastical history record the divergence in the date of celebration between Christians, for example, in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, who celebrated based on the Jewish date of 14 Nisan, and communities elsewhere who celebrated Easter on a movable Sunday, according to a calculation independent of the Jewish Passover. The issue reached its famous climax in the First Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 325. While the topic is not mentioned within the 20 canons issued by the council, the synodical letter sent to the Church of Alexandria at the time discusses the issue and declares henceforth a common celebration of Easter in conformity with Roman and Alexandrian customs. The custom in question, which has become an often repeated formula ever since and was just shared right now by His Eminence, is that Easter is to be celebrated on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox, the day in which theoretically the sun disk lines up exactly with the Earth's equator. This formula aimed to disengage the Christian celebration of Easter from the Jewish calculation of Passover, perceived both as inaccurate and undesirable as a basis for determining the central feast of Christianity. For centuries afterward, Christians in East and West celebrated Easter on the same day, notwithstanding any remaining communities in Asia Minor or elsewhere who may have continued to follow the 14 Nisan date, termed quartodecimans or 14ers in some of the literature. In fact, such is still the Easter formula followed by Christians worldwide. The issue, however, as many in attendance today know quite well, is that the Nicene formula gave no details on how to determine the relevant full moon or how to calculate the spring equinox. Churches adopted a fixed date for the spring equinox as March 21st of the Julian calendar, or March 22nd, which is April 2nd or 3rd in the Gregorian calculation, irrespective of whether this in fact corresponded to the position of the sun in a given year. This theoretical approach, combined with the gradual adoption of the Gregorian calendar by Western Christians since 1582, where March 21st in fact falls on April 3rd, has resulted in the current situation with which we're all familiar. where the date of Easter rarely corresponds between East and West. The issue of unifying once again the date of Easter became especially prominent in the 20th century as ecumenical dialogue flourished between East and West. The WCC has played a key role in this regard, most notably seen in the Aleppo Agreement of 1997, which proposed relying on the astronomical full moon following the astronomical spring equinox, determined from the meridian of Jerusalem as a location symbolic of Christian unity worldwide. Thus, the Aleppo Agreement sought to maintain faithfulness to the Council of Nicaea's Easter formula, while providing a means for the Easter date to be once again unified between East and West. One should also note that the Nicene formula itself promotes clearly astronomical means of determining Easter, rather than relationship to Jewish Passover, or any dogmatic principle, or worse, as is the case in all churches, reliance on a date theoretically associated with the spring equinox without regard to actual physical phenomena. As such, the Aleppo Agreement provided hope for both unity among Christians and also a more scientifically accurate faithfulness to the Nicene formula. Unfortunately, the proposal of Aleppo was not adopted by churches worldwide, each continuing with its traditional method of calculating Easter more than 25 years since. It is clear also that the intent of the Nicene formula was to provide the universal church with a common date for the celebration of the Lord's resurrection, the central feast of the liturgical year. Yet for many Christian communities worldwide, the fact that an Eastern Pascha rarely falls on the same day as a Western Easter is accepted as a self-evident reality with no further need of change. Within the Coptic Orthodox Church, for example, Pope Tawadros II, the spiritual leader of the Coptic Christianity worldwide, has repeatedly expressed a desire to reunify the date of Easter among the world's Christians. Yet, there have also been numerous conservative voices, especially within Egypt, who have opposed any such attempt that would mean a change in how the Coptic Church determines the date of Easter. Thus, while few within the Coptic Church, including the Pope himself, have voiced support for such unification efforts, a vocal opposition exists, which also includes numerous bishops and priests. Otherwise, one should also acknowledge that the issue is often portrayed as tangential or unimportant by the vast majority of Copts residing within Egypt. This is certainly due to the fact that the Coptic Christians represent the vast majority of Egypt's Christian population, and where the second day of Easter is actually an Egyptian national holiday known as Shem al-Nasim, further impeding a desire for change or unification with other Christian communities in East and West. Yet the situation is rather different for many Copts living in the West. While Egypt's Coptic population is estimated to be approximately 10 million, nearly 2 million by some estimates reside outside Egypt, concentrated mainly in the United States, Canada, and Australia. Thus, a significant percentage of Copts worldwide have their homes and church communities in places where Easter is celebrated according to the Western calculation based on the Gregorian calendar. For such faithful Copts seeking to live out their faith and culture in Western countries, or indeed for numerous families of second and third generation Copts with no personal connection to Egypt, the different Easter dates between their Coptic practice and that of the broader society represents not just an abstract issue of ecumenical dialogue, but a very real and tangible problem year after year. This is especially the case when one considers the traditional liturgical practices associated with Good Friday and Easter, which consist of especially lengthy church services and other customs compared to any other time in the year. For families of working adults and school-age children, maintaining connection to such venerable traditions can be especially challenging or downright impossible when Holy Week and Easter do not coincide with the Western calculation. Thus, in addition to the very important aspect of Christian unity and witness on this central feast of the gospel, the unification of Easter would also be of crucial importance for the continued vitality of traditional churches such as the Coptic Church as it continues to grow and evolve in the West. I believe that this year, 2025, much like several other years before, since 1997, represent a great symbolic and practical opportunity for revisiting this key issue of Christian unity, when all churches worldwide will celebrate Easter on the same day of April 20th. This year, however, provides the added advantage of being the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea, so intimately connected to the issue of the Easter date. and providing the occasion for numerous academic conferences and lectures worldwide discussing the Council, its theology, and its legacy, including, of course, its role in establishing the calculation of Easter. Thus, gatherings such as this present webinar, organized by the Faith and Order Commission of the WCC, represent significant events with the potential of raising awareness of the issue and complex history, as well as even galvanizing public opinion on a global scale, aimed at encouraging further dialogue and collaboration towards unity. Concern over the unity of the Easter celebration, however, is not merely a modern phenomenon or the product of contemporary ecumenical relations. Besides the Nicene formula itself, designed to establish such unity, another famous episode in church history is the disagreement, circa 153, between Bishop Polycarp of Smyrna, who celebrated Easter on 14 Nisan, and Bishop Anicetus of Rome, who followed the Roman practice of a Sunday Easter. The key point here is that despite reaching no agreement on the matter, neither bishop labeled the other a heretic or deemed him worthy of excommunication, a refreshing example of healthy disagreement, especially in the modern context. But perhaps more interesting is another lesser-known episode from the medieval Arabic tradition concerning the celebration of Easter in 1007. The episode in question is recounted in several sources, but primarily in the addendum to the Annals of Eutychius, Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Alexandria, written by Yahya of Antioch in the 11th century. There we read that in 1007, during the Patriarchate of Arsenius of Alexandria, a disagreement arose between the Eastern Orthodox Christians, known as Melkites, living in Jerusalem, and those in Egypt over the accurate calculation of the Easter date, and by extension, the beginning of the Lenten fast preceding it. The remarkable thing in this account is that to resolve the dispute, the Egyptian Melkite leadership conferred not with their fellow Eastern Orthodox in Antioch or Constantinople, but with other local Christian communities, namely the Copts and the so-called Nestorians, members of the Assyrian Church of the East. The resulting decision was that Easter that year would be on 6 Nisan, April 6th, contrary to the calculations of the Melkites of Jerusalem, a decision ultimately accepted also by the Church of Jerusalem. The lesson from this remarkable account is that despite long-standing breaks in Eucharistic communion and an unfortunate legacy of polemics on all sides, it was nonetheless possible for all three Christian communities in Fatimid Egypt to unite and agree on the date of Easter. It was even more remarkable that the Eastern Orthodox community preferred to confer with other local Christian leaders than to simply acquiesce to the Easter date calculated by their brothers in Jerusalem. One can only hope that such pragmatic ecumenism can still be possible today, where Christians of different calendars continue to live side by side, both in the Middle East and elsewhere. So what can be done to move this issue forward in our own age? I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that the topic of a common Easter date has yet to acquire the urgency it deserves in many of our communities, where it is viewed either with indifference or outright suspicion and hostility. The first order of business, then, must be to raise awareness of the ideas I have tried to highlight in this brief and oversimplified contribution, namely that the issue is one of calendrical observances rather than dogmatic positions, that the goal of a common Easter date is not merely of abstract significance for ecumenical dialogue, but of very practical significance for Christian families and communities, and that the desire for such a date is not a modern-day obsession or trend, but has been consistent throughout church history. Another underlying point that may not be as well known to the public is that similar to the difference in the date of Christmas between most of the world and those churches that still celebrate it on January 6th or 7th, the Easter date too is strongly connected to the continued use of the Julian calendar, centuries after the introduction of the Gregorian calendar reform in 1582. Adoption of the Gregorian calendar for the calculation of the spring equinox and the date of Easter would go a long way in eliminating the frequent difference between East and West. Thus, my final suggestion is that churches still employing the Julian calendar, such as the Coptic Orthodox Church, should seriously consider a broader calendar reform that would include both the fixed feasts, such as Christmas, as well as the movable cycle of Lent and Easter. Such a reform would have the advantage of targeting both Christians and Christmas and Easter together, rather than introducing incomplete changes to one or the other major feasts of the Church. While such a step may also seem unlikely for a conservative faith community, already in one area, the Coptic Diocese of Los Angeles in Southern California, permission is given in certain years for parishes to hold nativity services on December 25th for pastoral reasons. Such a measure, approved by and promoted by His Eminence Metropolitan Serapion of Los Angeles, have indeed been met with recurring opposition. Yet it is precisely such prudent and local measures designed to bring the Church's calendar in some measure of conformity to local reality that show signs of hope that someday the Coptic Orthodox Church and similarly conservative churches may agree to a unified calendar and Easter calculation, not only for the noble goal of Christian unity and witness, but just as importantly, for the sake of millions of Christians worldwide who struggle to remain faithful to their own tradition while following an outdated calendar out of sync with their own lives in the contemporary Western world. Thank you very much, and I apologize for going a bit over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Arsenius, for that really helpful centuries spanning, but contemporary also presentation. And so we'll turn now to Dr. Johannes Oeldemann, and he will speak to us next.
Thank you for inviting me to comment on the question of a common Easter date from a Roman Catholic perspective. What I say in the following is my personal view, but one that I believe is shared by many Catholics. We are talking today on the occasion of the anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. I would therefore like to begin by recalling what the Council decided about Easter. As we already heard in its canons, there are no provisions regarding the date of Easter. The rule for calculating the date of Easter, which most churches refer to today, is only found in later documents. For me, this means that the primary concern of the Council was to agree on a common date for Easter. Its concern was not to establish a specific rule that would be unalterable for all time. Rather, the Council Fathers were concerned with strengthening the credibility of the Christian faith through a common celebration of the feast of the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the entire oikumene, the whole known world at that time. What can we conclude from this for our situation today? It is important that Christians celebrate Easter together. This is especially true for Christians in one place or one nation, one state. In families where one spouse is Catholic and the other Orthodox, different dates for Easter pose a major challenge because both the fasting periods and the feast days differ. Catholics therefore consider the question of Easter primarily from a pastoral point of view. Even though most Catholics celebrate Easter according to the Gregorian calendar, there are some countries where they, along with the majority of the population, celebrate according to the old Julian calendar, and others where Catholics celebrate, follow the new Julian calendar. This is evidence of a certain pragmatism on part of Roman Catholics, but in my opinion, this is exactly what the Council of Nicaea wanted. The common celebration of Easter is the decisive factor, not the date itself. In the context of the anniversary of the Council, however, we are not concerned with the question of how regional or local agreements could be reached with regard to the date of Easter, but how it could be possible for all Christians worldwide to once again celebrate the feast of the Lord's resurrection together on one day. In its final document, the Synod of the Catholic Church, which concluded in October last year and spent more than 3 years examining the importance of synodality for the life of the Church, emphasizes the following. The anniversary of the Council of Nicaea will also be an opportunity to launch bold initiatives for a common date for Easter so that we can celebrate the resurrection of the Lord on the same day, as will happen providentially in 2025. End of quotation. During the ecumenical prayer service at the end of the week of prayer for Christian unity on 25th of January 2025, Pope Francis emphasized that the Catholic Church is prepared to accept any proposal that leads to a common Easter. In concrete terms, this means that the Roman Catholic Church does not insist on the 400 years old tradition of calculating the date of Easter according to the Gregorian calendar. In dialogue between Pope Francis and the Coptic Pope Tawadros, There has already been talk of celebrating Easter on the 3rd Sunday of April in future, and thus avoiding all differences between the calendars. I am skeptical as to whether all churches are prepared to accept such a proposal. However, it is quite obvious that the Roman Catholic Church does not claim that everyone else should follow its rule, but is prepared to follow the others, if there is a chance that Easter can be celebrated together in future as a result. Easter 2025 would be a good opportunity to return to the practice of celebrating Easter together. But realistically, we need a longer process to prepare such a decision, because Easter is not just a church feast, but also a cultural reality that shapes social life in many aspects. For example, many countries have school holidays around Easter. These are planned on a long-term basis, so that sufficient advanced planning is required if churches are to agree to a different date of Easter than is currently in our state calendars. One final thought: a common Easter date will not come about because all bishops worldwide suddenly have an inspiration from the Holy Spirit that leads to a solution of this centuries-long controversy. We need to think about what concrete steps can be taken, because the Holy Spirit needs people as his instruments. So, who should take these steps? I would like to take up a suggestion made in the study document on the Bishop of Rome and his service to Christian unity, published by the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity in June 2024. In addition to strengthening synodality ad intra, that means within the Catholic Church, the text argues in favor of developing synodality ad extra, more specifically, to promote conciliar fellowship through regular meetings among church leaders at a worldwide level in order to make visible and deepen the communion they already share. This is a quote from this document. Therefore, in conclusion, a very concrete proposal. What if other church leaders, such as the patriarchs of the Oriental Orthodox churches, the Archbishop of Canterbury, if there is one elected by then, the president of the Lutheran World Federation, etc., were invited to the forthcoming meeting between Pope Francis and Patriarch Bartholomew on the occasion of the Council's anniversary at its historical venue in Iznik. Such an ecumenical synaxis, to take up a terminology coined by Patriarch Bartholomew, could issue a mandate to draw up a concrete proposal by the next Common Easter, which is due again in 3 years' time. Remarkably, Easter will fall on the same date every 3 years in the Gregorian and in the Julian calendar over the next 10 years. 2025, 2028, 2031, 2034. The decade ahead of us offers the opportunity to give new momentum to efforts to agree on a common date of Easter. Thus, I would like to conclude with a plea: let us use this kairos and seriously search for a common date of Easter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johannes. That's for your provocative and in very positive opportunities that you've presented to us. I think we're ready to move to then our fourth speaker, Reverend Dr. Tomi Karttunen. I'll just ask that he be.
Yeah, thank you very much.
There we are. Thank you.
A Lutheran perspective to the question. The adoption of the Gregorian calendar in Protestant Europe. My contextual perspective on the celebration of Easter is European, Lutheran, and Finnish. The current Finnish calendar's historical background lies in the era when Finland was part of Sweden and its Lutheran state church until 1809, as well as in general European Protestant and ecumenical praxis. Medieval pre-Gregorian Catholic influence and some Eastern Orthodox impulses are also present. We are here in North, we did not adopt the Gregorian calendar in the 1580s as in the Catholic European countries, but after a longer period of reception. By that time, the Pope's ambassadors tried to persuade the Protestant countries to follow the Gregorian reform, but with poor results. There were religious and political reasons not to institute a calendar reform. Moreover, Finland had earlier its own ways of calculating time. Eventually, the Julian calendar was introduced in Sweden and Finland in the 17th century, though in Western Europe, the Gregorian calendar had proven more precise and practical by 1700. Towards the end of 17th century, an improved calendar was developed in Germany, which used the Gregorian rule of a leap day, but followed an astronomical rule for Easter. Many Protestant countries, like the German Protestant states, Denmark, Protestant cantons of Switzerland, and used this improved calendar, in which 18th of February 1700 was followed by 1st of March 1700. By the end of the 18th century, many countries had started to use the Gregorian calendar and the Gregorian rule for Easter. In Sweden and Finland, the latter of which was the eastern part of the Swedish kingdom for 600 years, the Julian calendar was used until 1740. The next step was that an astronomical rule for Easter became part of the Julian calendar. In 1753, the kingdom started using the Gregorian calendar. The 17th of February 1753 was followed by 1st of March 1753. Sweden and Finland followed the Gregorian calendar with an astronomical date for Easter. The so-called improved German calendar was thus in use. Finland became an autonomous Grand Duchy of the Russian Empire in 1809, which presented its own challenges for the calendar question. In 1869, Finland began to use the Gregorian calendar with the Gregorian rule for Easter. So it could be said that from a historical perspective, the Finnish tradition would probably be quite open to a model that dated Easter astronomically in the spirit of Nicaea. In our context, I do not recognize a utilitarian argumentation in the recent discussion that supports fixed date for Easter. Ecumenically, astronomical dating would open alternatives using a calendar which, based on the best available scientific knowledge, placed Easter according to the Nicene rule between 22nd of March and 25th of April. As we have heard, the priority of Nicene Council seems to have been to celebrate Easter together using the best available astronomical knowledge, which symbolically refers to a cosmic Christology that is already included in the date of Easter. Creation and redemption belong together. The implication is quite clear in the rule that Easter is celebrated on Sunday following the first vernal full moon. Sunday, the day of resurrection, proclaims the victory of light and life over darkness and death. In the synodal letter after the First Council of Nicaea, the intention that Easter should be celebrated jointly on Sunday, the day of resurrection, not on Saturday as in the Jewish tradition, seems very clear. The Finnish context is in a way unique and perhaps even pioneering, who knows, because the churches of the Western and Eastern Orthodox traditions celebrate Easter together. The Nicene Council's intention that Christians should celebrate Easter together clearly underlies this. This is also an important precondition for common witness in the context of a secular and pluralistic society, and is practical for organizing worship because in the Finnish state calendar, not only Easter Sunday, but also Good Friday and Easter Monday are official holidays. In recent decades, the Orthodox Church, whose members constitute about 1.1% of Finland's population, the Lutherans about 63%, the Orthodox have received much positive publicity because the Orthodox worshipping life and Easter traditions are experienced as beautiful, mystical, exotic. Some Lutherans have adopted some of them. There are also geopolitical and national identity factors in the Finnish Orthodox Church's decision to celebrate Easter according to the tradition of Finnish society as a whole. There is no longer any Western-Eastern Church tension here. The state's recognition of the Gregorian calendar as a general European and global date management method reinforced also national identity in the Finnish society on its way towards independence. Under the pressure of Russian unification policy, willingness to become independent strengthened. The revolution in 1917 in Russia opened a window of opportunity for this. During the chaotic times that followed the revolution of the First World War, the Finnish Orthodox Church was recognized as part of the Patriarchate of Constantinople and an autonomous church based on the Tomos issued in 1923. In the autumn of 2023, the Orthodox Bishops' Conference in Finland confirmed the principle that Easter should be celebrated according to the decisions made in 1923. The Orthodox therefore celebrate Easter with the other Finnish mainline churches. The common point of reference is the instruction of the Council of Nicaea 325 to celebrate Easter on the Sunday following the first vernal full moon. The spring equinox was defined as 21st of March. The Church should use the best available astronomical knowledge in the calculations. The Finnish Orthodox Church bishops argued, I quote, on the 9th of June 1923, Ecumenical Patriarch Meletius IV stated in Ecclesiasticae Aletheia, the official journal of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, removing the difference between the religious and state way of calculating times is absolutely necessary, and there is no canonical hindrance to amending the ecclesial way of counting time to correspond to the findings of astronomy. According to Meletius, defining the full moon would happen based on astronomical calculations taking scientific progress into account. The so-called calendar of Meletius described here was approved for use in our local church at the Extraordinary Synod in 1923 and received confirmation from the state on 31st of August 1923. End of quote. Many Finnish Orthodox Christians now live in ecumenical marriages where their spouse is Lutheran. It is also pastorally and ecumenically good to be able to celebrate Easter together as Christians in the same family with relatives and friends. Easter is a vital part of Christian faith and life. When Christians celebrate it together, it supports the positive understanding of unity in diversity within Finnish society. It enriches and provides mutual empowerment when different traditions each carry the core Christian message in their own ways. A common Easter nevertheless has not been able to stop the march of secularization, but it does pave the way for deepening our witness to Easter today. Taking further steps internationally would also give an important signal, would probably revitalize ecumenical cooperation in other areas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tomi. Again, positive and possible solutions. We just have a few minutes to address some of the questions in the Q&A. And quite a few of you commented both in the chat and in the Q&A that, why can't we just focus on the unity question and the desire for Christians to celebrate together and not worry so much about the calendars and some of you in your presentations have addressed some ways they hope we can find that might happen. But that was probably the most popular question. So we hear this great desire for this unity. And so one question perhaps that maybe Metropolitan Job you could address is, why did the Great and Holy Synod in 2016 not address the question of Easter? And is there some way that we could see that path forward from there?
As you can see from my presentation, everything has been prepared ahead of time before the Holy and Great Council, so that the calendar reform and the Paschalian reform could take place at the Holy and Great Council. But at the synaxis that has decided of the dates of the councils and has approved the agenda of the councils, there were voices from the delegation of the Church of Russia, followed by a few other churches, that the faithful, the believers of the church, are not ready for a calendar reform, and that a calendar reform could create schism. And for this reason, in order to avoid any schisms, the hierarchs, the delegations of the synaxes of 2016, in January 2016 in Geneva, decided to take off from the agenda the question of the calendar reform. These are the historical facts. Very often in the arguments, there is a reference that the believers, the faithful, are not ready for a calendar reform. My question to the people using that argument is to say, what are you doing to prepare the believers for a calendar reform? So, in my opinion, it is very important that we take. I would like to share the thought of Johannes Oeldemann, that we have to take this opportunity in these upcoming years to explain to the people why is there a difference, and why we should resolve this difference. Because, of course, as you can see, everybody uses the definition of Nicaea. The problem is that some of the tools that we are using do not correspond anymore to the astronomic data, and therefore we can say that are in contradiction with the resolution of Nicaea.
Thank you. That's helpful. There were some questions about, there was a conversation about the issue of separating ourselves from the Jews, and so that came from Susan Derber, the former moderator of the Faith and Order Commission, and was answered by Dagmar, who is also a former member of the Secretariat of Faith and Order. And so there was clear distinction made between saying we don't want to do things the way the Jews do, and recognizing that the Jewish calendar was becoming increasingly difficult for the Christians. So thank you for that Q&A there about that. There are also questions: what is the World Council doing, or what can Faith and Order do? And the task of Faith and Order is to assist the churches to call one another to unity. So we've heard some good proposals here from our panelists and from you in the chat and the Q&A about possibilities for trying to find ways to to help the churches call one another together, to have further dialogue, and to continue to work on these this challenging question, but to come together and do that together. And so it's exciting to hear those, and I hope those will come. Some questions were about a little more about dates and how they are how they are coming together for Easter. You heard that there are some, the next decade brings us exciting opportunities, but you can also look at some of the material that was sent to you, or that you can see on the events page, about some of the historical dates and how those have gone together. One person asked, what date was the Celtic Church using when the Synod at Whitby made a decision? And I'm not sure if any of our panelists have an answer to that question. No. So you might have to find that answer somewhere else. I understand we have 1 minute till we finish. So maybe I will conclude with great thanks to our 4 panelists, and to Mawuli for bringing us into this discussion, which we can't solve in an hour, but which gives us so many possibilities, theological possibilities, practical suggestions to moving forward in this context. And so great thanks to all of you. Many thanks to the hundreds of you who showed up online, who have said hello to one another and hello to us. We hope in your context that this might animate you to find ways to work with your fellow Christians and ask that question about Easter, and to celebrate perhaps together this year ecumenically the date of Easter, as we will do worldwide. And to remind you that this webinar will be posted, so you can rewatch it or share it with others. But also the papers that we heard will be presented in a Faith and Order document, which will be available to us all. And we'll try to embrace some of the question and answer materials, as well as the Aleppo statement and some other materials that will help us move forward together on this very important topic. So may God bless us all. Thank you for this wonderful time, brief time together on such an important issue.